Hi, this is Linda Shea with Drilling Contractor, and welcome to our virtual panel discussion today, sponsored by Schlumberger. So we have invited 3 industry experts, 2 from operators and 1 from a major service company. And today we're going to talk about how we think the industry can try to accelerate and sustain the learning curve through digitalization and automation. Before I introduce the panelists, just a few words to kind of set the background for our discussion. I think we all know that there's been a phenomenal drive over the past few years to move the drilling industry toward digitalization and automation. Brought about by the economic conditions due to the downturn, companies across the spectrum have realized that they need not just incremental changes, but step changes in both cost and efficiency. And they're realizing that they can't achieve these changes by doing what they've always done before and by squeezing the supply chain. As the rest of the world moves to adopt Industry 4.0, companies in the drilling space are also navigating their own journeys through digitalization and automation. So some of the fundamental questions being asked are, what is the optimum thing to do, and are we actually doing it? So today we're going to talk about some of the advances that have already been achieved and look at how that points us to where we need to go next. With that, I will introduce our panelists. First, we have Riaz Israel, who currently leads BP's Wells Technology team. Previously, he has held roles in drilling engineering and operations, managed real-time monitoring centers, and has worked to develop strategies and deploy solutions related to drilling technology, with a special focus on drilling automation. He is passionate about the role that analytics and automation can play in well construction and is championing their adoption both within BP and to the industry. Next, we have Rodrigo Gallo, Digital Drilling Business Manager for Land and Offshore Edge Solutions for Schlumberger. He has more than 15 years of experience in the industry and has held several international roles across the well construction process that go from engineering and operations to project management positions. He has also played a big part in the product and business development of the Schlumberger drilling automation system. Last but not least, we have Victor Figueroa, who is Chief Operating Officer for Point Energy Partners. Victor began his career with Baker Hughes in 1997, where he worked for 20 years and held various positions from field engineer to sales and operations director. He joined Point Energy Partners in July 2018 as the Chief Operating Officer and is currently active in the Delaware Basin operating wells. He oversaw the drilling of Point Energy Partners' first well and is currently drilling the second well on the 5-well, 1-rig program for 2019. So gentlemen, welcome to our virtual panel discussions today, and thank you for being here. So I'm going to pose my first question to Victor. What do you see as the current challenges in automating the well construction process today, and why do you think we haven't seen even more automation and use by now?
When I look at automation and I look at new technology coming into the mix of drilling wells, I think that we haven't gone beyond or as fast as we should, just because of timing. Operators are adapting to their learning curves, and once you start putting in new aspects to the business or to the drilling side, then they seem that it needs to be done on special projects before they can incorporate it into their largest rig counts. So I think it's all about learning curve, where they are today with their learning curve, where they feel comfortable, where they've dropped down as they drill wells, starting in the Delaware Basin, for example, starting wells in the 40-day mark, now, sub-30s. So my perception is that this might cause them to go back to the initial portions of the learning curve, and then having to come back down to the place where we are today, or even beyond, or even optimizing further the time that it takes to drill wells right now. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I see that might be causing some delay of incorporating more automation into the mix.
There's also a lot of skepticism still as to what is the value that automation can deliver. I think we need to learn a bit more as an industry of what that is. People tend to relate automation and look for performance value, for savings, which of course are very important, and that could probably be the end goal. But I think there's a lot to demonstrate to the industry around procedural adherence and consistency and all those things. And once the industry overall understands just how valuable that is as well, they will probably pursue it much faster.
As with any new technology, the entry cost is still a little bit high, and the returns are, sometimes a little bit challenging to justify. So I think as these systems become more mature, as the availability increases in the market, I think the entry cost will become lower, and we'll see that acceleration, happen.
So as we know, our industry can be a little bit slower to adopt new technology sometimes. So what are some practical steps that companies could take to more effectively introduce new automation or digitalization technologies into their drilling operations?
Big data is a word that's been used a lot, right? And I think there's a lot of data available to come up with ways to introduce automation and digitalization within the drilling side. And that's just a starting point, because you can take this all the way from the reservoir analysis to the fracking side of it as well, right? But focusing on the drilling side, there's a lot of activity, lots of rigs active drilling in certain areas, which produce data that then can be transformed into ways to automate certain sections of the wells that you're drilling. I believe that if the focus is to bring it in, or easier way to bring it in is to identify which areas the automation can benefit the most within the drilling of a well, and start analyzing those aspects of it and see where is it that we can create, the digital twins of equipment that we're using. Well, you go the well skates, you can create, diagrams of wells digitally, and how can we, or what are the best ways of doing and drilling an intermediate section or a production hole. With the amount of data that we have, we should be able to come up with the best ways of doing these things digitally using automation.
So it sounds like you're saying the decision should be data-driven.
Well, it's data-driven to come up with options on how to improve what we currently do manually, or what we currently do semi-automatically, right? So you're on a rig site, and you're on a rig, and you're on the rig floor, and things are very semi-automatic. So how can we turn in the auto driller into a true automated driller? How can we turn in an iron roughneck into an automated iron roughneck? Not handled by a person in the cabin, but handled by somebody in the city, where they can do things through cloud and be able to truly automate the system, right? That's where my mind goes when I see automation, is how can we minimize the amount of people we have on the rig site. That saves HS&E, that's safety, that's so many things that you can save on that thing, right? So that's the process that I see needs to be improved on: communication from office to cloud to rig site to downhole, or to equipment on the rig floor, to whatever it is that we need to move, right? But you can separate these things into sections and start going one after one, because if you start going after all at the same time, then it could come up to a lot of things to do at the same time, and then you don't see the focus, and probably you lose some of the attention of the operators that would want something like that.
So Riaz, what do you think companies can do to better measure success when it comes to initial deployments of automation or digitalization technologies?
There's some fairly obvious things, and I hope everyone is doing them, which is understanding what are your performance benchmarks before you implement an automated system, and then having an equivalent method to measure those performance benchmarks once you have the system in place. And there's some nuances to that, that your data, once you have the automated system, has to be labeled so you can effectively tell when the system is on or off. I think in sort of looking at the benefits and measuring success, there are multiple ways of looking at that, and I think perhaps looking at just the immediate performance gains might be a little bit short-sighted, because I think automation offers a much broader scope of value. It's almost like an iceberg, if you will. The performance gains for now are just the tip of the iceberg, but how do you create or ascribe value to things like being more consistent in your processes, being able to have a reliable outcome, and in some cases, being able to decouple that well performance from the particular person on the rig at that time, right? So I think all these are value aspects that are key that we need to sort of take a hard look at. I agree, the performance, the efficiency gains are obviously something that those are easy and quick to measure, but I think the bigger value is in some of the other pieces I mentioned. And then obviously with automation, there is an important safety component that could be introduced. Are we getting people off the red zone and off of hazardous places on the rig site? And again, there's we shouldn't really ascribe a dollar value to those types of benefits.
So do any of the panelists have any success stories they would like to share?
We've been really active in this space over the last, I would say, 2 years. We've delivered several pilot projects. Those include drilling, RP optimization projects where we've drilled, close to 80,000 foot now in closed loop. Automated connections where we have done over 300 sequences, and automated tripping where we have tripped something like 1.5 million feet under automated control. And I think the real measure of success is, yes, we've seen efficiency improvements in that, but I think it's that realization that I mentioned before where we see real value in the operational discipline that automation brings to our operation, and that consistency. But we also see this as a platform to expand more and more aspects of well construction into that success. And I think the measure of that success is that now hopefully we are moving into a place where we're trying to selectively and where it's most appropriately rapidly expand those pilots into deployments. The big challenge now is how do we make the business model work with all our vendors, right? So I think those are some of our success examples, I would say that.
So this question typically relates to, again, performance and what's the savings associated to the test and all that. And I'll touch a little bit on that as well, but I wanted to highlight two other areas that are actually quite important as well. One is around the evolution of the technology. So in our case, for instance, we had a first generation of drilling automation back in 2010. And at that time, we had a fixed sequence for things like drilling a stand. And we learned very quickly that a rigid system like that was not going to be sustainable in the long run. And we evolved into introducing AI technology to it such that we can deal with uncertainty and include additional functionality as you go forward, with the hope and with the aim of doing holistic optimization, because that's one of the challenges of drilling. Is really they call it an art because there are so many moving pieces, right? And if you pull here, something else moves, and so that's why we want to take this approach of holistic optimization. The other area that I want to highlight is around the openness, which I think is also quite important. We have had the opportunity to work with 5 major rig control vendors, and we have now our system compatibility with all those 5 major control vendors, which I think is a very unique and different motion with regards to where the industry was moving in the past, right? So I think this is also a very important success story that we need to communicate. And of course, with regards to performance and savings and all that, yes, we have done a number of tests with regards to auto-downlink, with regards to ROP optimization, with regards to drill stand connections, etc. And there are some performance associated, of course, in the number of hours, sometimes even a day or two savings per well. But like I said, to me, what we need to start focusing on is around validating and understanding the value of basically you ask a machine to do something for you, is it doing it? Because if you can assure that consistency, the performance will come sooner or after.
So Riaz, earlier you mentioned commercial models. So how do you think those models can be changed to help the industry transition to more automated drilling?
I think that there are many options to do that. I think that collaboration between the operator, the drilling contractor, and the service providers, and not just sort of surface level, really deep, long-lasting collaborations where there is persistence from all parties, and because there's a common good at the end, and each sort of party sort of almost admitting, we as the drilling contractor, there are pieces here we may not be as good in or as comfortable with managing, and similarly the operator, and sort of conceding your weaknesses, so to speak, but realizing that at the end of the day, as an industry, we'll be stronger. So I think collaboration with that, the supply chain with that longer term objective in mind is probably one of the things that I think we could be better at.
Collaboration is key. Willingness to share the risks, because the operator, in this case, I would step in knowing that it's the new technology that's coming in, it's automation, there's some little things that we need to work on as we move forward, right? How can we then work together as a team to move it forward? As you said, contractor, operator, service providers. Because the idea at the end of the day is to have everything automated within the practice of drilling a well or constructing a well, right? So the drilling contractor is one, but all the services that are combined within to make this well and construct the well need to be part of the automation. So that collaboration within all the companies is what needs to happen, and the willingness that, hey, the risk is there, so we need to be clear that the risk monetarily is there, and that you're willing to do it, right?
I mean, we all know that automation is a revolutionary and disruptive technology, and it's only reasonable to expect that the current business models and commercial models are challenged and changed accordingly, right? While no one, I guess, has a perfect answer for this question, I think it's worth exploring further with regards to what sort of elements need to be present when you engage in these discussions. And some of them are, well, they need to be properly balanced between what's the value being delivered, what are the risks being taken and distributed, and what are the investments being made. And typically, this last one is not as obvious. But if there's no incentive for that, then the different companies do not participate as much. So they all need to be properly balanced on those areas. And I think the other point that they raised already is around, in our industry, typically there's a client and a supplier. There's a bilateral relationship. With automation, it spreads out wider and broader. And so you may now need to have a conversation, if not a contract, at least a conversation that involves 3 or 4 different parties, right? We talked about recontractor, operator, service company, but also the control vendor in some cases, etc. So I think those pieces need to be included as part of the discussion.
Are there any challenges to having that conversation earlier than we usually do?
It really depends on how the engagement came to be, I guess. When it comes with different players, there's typically one that is pursuing with more eagerness than the other ones. And so that is basically when the challenges start to appear, right? When you find partners or collaborations that they are all basically on the same page, that they all have the same vision, then the challenges obvious or less.
So Riaz, how do you think the industry is doing on ensuring the interoperability of our automation systems and software?
I think we're in a much better place than we were, I would say, 3 to 5 years ago. 3 to 5 years ago, there were almost, 2 camps in the drilling industry. There was a group who were sort of adamant that, we had to have, rigid standards around interoperability and automation. And there's another camp that said, no, we need to let this thing evolve naturally and see, how it goes and how we learn. And I think where we are today is that we've had a little bit of both of those things happening. And through, the work, for example, that DSATS has done in, developing a rig data model and identifying OPC UA, but in parallel work that folks like Schlumberger and other vendors have done in really accelerating the deployment so that we learn really what are the parts we need to standardize and where, what does interoperability mean for our industry. So I think today the conversation is really different. It's not, well, everyone, you need to open up, all of the details of your proprietary control system to me, and then I should be able to just, walk in within a couple hours and plug in and start talking. I think now the discussion is more around, well, I'm good at, rig controls, you're good at writing, optimization algorithms. How do we make our systems work together? So I keep what I'm good at, you keep what you're good at. And that's the sort of where I think the interoperability discussion has moved, which I think is better for everyone. I still think we have a long way to go, but we're definitely making good progress.
What I've seen in the past, and a project that I was part of, we had the ability to look at what other industries have that we can incorporate inside the oil and gas industry and make our industry a lot better. So we look at the aviation industry and how by creating digital twins with the amount of data that they had of all the flight hours available, they can easily come up with an idea of how a turbine looks digitally and how it should look and how it should function. So those algorithms, when we bring them in to the oil and gas industry, you can apply these to service lines within the services that are provided. One, for example, is providing that or incorporating that into a rotary steerable assembly, for example. There's a variety of rotary steerables in the market that, or in the industry, that create amounts of data that you can come up with the same example of, or the same result of the digital twin, depending on which area you want to drill a well, right? And that should give you enough information to then generate the data to say, okay, this is the way we can make the wells a lot more efficient, or drill them a lot faster, or be, not trip as much as we have to trip as we drill through horizontal sections, for example.
Rodrigo, earlier you mentioned having to have conversations among more parties, and we know there's been an increased focus on collaboration in recent years. So in your view, do you think that better collaboration has actually helped us to accelerate our learning curve?
Yes, certainly. That's no question. Schlumberger has, in fact, engaged in a few collaboration exercises in the past, and not only we have learned a great deal in them, we actually managed to do things much quicker. When it comes to automation, as we have been saying, automation introduces a level of complexity, not only on the technical aspect, but also on the commercial aspect and also on the operational perspective, right? If on top of that you add different players, then it's almost like adding a bunch of variables to one equation. It becomes very hard to solve, and especially to solve it alone. Sometimes you need to engage into a collaboration agreement with certain companies or vendors, or etc., that will create that protective environment. And that protected environment can mean you can scope, you can put a limit to the scope of the agreement, you can put a cap to the risks, you can put a cap to the time frame, and that basically gives you the learning environment that sometimes we need in order to accelerate the adoption.
To wrap up our conversation, I'd like to consider the future of digitalization, automation in our industry. So I'd like to hear each panelist's thoughts on your vision for the coming decade. Riaz, maybe we can start with you.
I think it's only going to increase in the scope and breadth of how these technologies show up in drilling. We're sort of at the cusp now where we'll see a rapid acceleration in how we use things like machine learning models and how we can incorporate that into true execution on the rig. We will see things like robotics start to appear more and more on drilling rigs, and I think the overall result or the culmination of all this hopefully should be that we become more efficient as an industry, we become safer, and we may be even able to reduce the footprint of our rigs and just become a lot more competitive in providing energy to the world. So I think the other thing that we'll see happening is the competency and the training profile of the crews that work the rig will change, because as we get a lot more sophisticated, there's going to be different skill sets than what we've been accustomed to in the last 30, 40 years of how you staff and crew a drilling rig. So I definitely think that's going to be one of the changes we see.
To me, the future of automation and digitalization is that of continuous improvement and sustainable performance. When you think about automation, people often relate to it as just another level of mechanization or basically encapsulated on the execution part. Reality is that automation can apply to decision making, it can apply to planning, it can apply to evaluation and assessment. So if you bring automation and you combine it with digitalization, the synergy that creates is substantial. And if you then apply it through all phases of the well construction, then the gains are enormous. And I think that's where the industry needs to go.
10 years from now, I would imagine seeing us touching a button and having a well plan for us. Then again, it's easier said than done, right? Mm-hmm. But I look at it as the starting point of where we are right now in automation, right? And bringing digitalization into the mix. Digitalization is going to allow us to go before we put the rig on location. So how do we select the places where we're going to drill our wells? And how do we select the right spots? How can we digitalize all the data that we have available that when we do select, we want to drill a well in the Wolfcamp A, for example, or in the Eagleford, that once we click on a little button, it spells out, here are the best performing wells in your area, and here's how they were drilled and completed, right? And then you there go from planning your well, then sending the information to the automation of a rig, drilling your well, and then having availability of data as well to complete and produce and frack your well. You know, when you look at all the life chain of a well, it should be interconnected. And I think we have enough information to put it together. We just need to, force ourselves to put the time and effort to digitalize everything that we have. That would not only have us a lot more efficient, it'll be more effective for us on everything that we do. And that creates a lot more productivity for everybody. That creates it increases the profit for everybody at every level, right? Operator, service provider, contractor. At the end of the day, you're drilling wells to create energy, but companies are looking at the profit as well. So how can we generate that and make sure that on our side, that the barrel of oil, the cost for that is a lot lower every day, and on the service side to make sure that their field profit, operating profits, whatever it is, gets higher and higher, right? So it's a combination of things, a collaboration, and once everybody understands that that's what it is, we'll make it happen.
Well, I want to thank everyone for participating in our virtual panel discussion today. Hopefully we gave our viewers some things to think about, maybe triggered some ideas that they can take back to their companies and their operations. So thank you again. And I want to also thank our sponsor, Schlumberger. And also finally, I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today. We hope to see you again at our next virtual panel discussion. Thank you.